Good evening, friends. Welcome to this edition of the Thursday night mystery wine blind tasting. I'm here on a beautiful spring evening at Field & Main Restaurant with this little very expressive, gorgeous aroma of a red wine, and looking forward to sharing it with you. If you're joining, please feel free to chime in and let me know you're here. I look forward to your feedback and comments as we progress through this tasting. Have a whole host of tasting this week available to you beyond this mystery wine tasting. For those of you that are joining us tonight with this tasting and have an appointment with us on Saturday for our spring wine buying event, kudos. I look forward to seeing you and pouring some really cool wines. We have 16 wines that we'll be pouring and some other wines that you can take home that day. But some great wines to sample. For those of you that don't know about it, on Saturday we will host one of two buying events that we do each year. We do one in the spring and the fall, and this Saturday is the spring buying event, where we feature wines that focus kind of on wonderful wines to have around the table for patio kind of dining, summer dining, lighter fare, barbecue fare, intriguing patio kind of crushable whites, and some more textured, interesting ones. We have a little bit of rosé to pour, and so some fun wines to share. So if you're in the area and plan on being around Marshall and want to taste some fantastic wines, hop onto our site and make a reservation for a time slot between 12 and 3 on Saturday. Hello to Dean and Bobbin. Great to have you guys back as always. I missed you the other night in the restaurant. I said hi, but I was running to another table, and by the time I got back to you, you were out, and it was your birthday, I think, Bobbin, right? So happy birthday to you, belated. Bernard, welcome. Glad to have you guys. Sarah, hello. Candy and Kevin, good evening to you as well. I think there are a few more folks that are just joining on now. Did you have the same kind of experience I did by just opening the wine and pouring it? I did that seconds ago. It's expressive at the jump. The nose is magnificent. We'll get there, of course, in due course, but this is lovely. It has a combination of smells that are decidedly, for me, old world, but I'm not going to presuppose. But like I've said before in the past, this is part of the process, especially for those of us that have been doing this for a while. You begin to have catalog memories, smell memories, taste memories, and that informs some of your capability in blind tasting. And so you might have a reference point, something that jogs a taste or smell memory, and you go with that a little bit. You make note of it. You give credence to it, but it's difficult if you just get tractor beamed by that, because there are similarities between wines. You could think, wow, gosh, this smells like a Merlot from Bordeaux, and it turns out to be a Cabernet from Chile, right? There are similar characteristics, but getting tractor beamed on that first idea is dangerous, but you should always keep it as a reference point, and it might be a real great indicator of where you're going to head. You still work the process in order to verify that initial conclusion, right? So Lutzenheiser's welcome, and the Duns, Mark and Jill. Super glad to have you guys here too. Oh, wow. That is just a beautiful nose. It's transfixed by it. Anyway, let's start. What do we have? Chris Pearman. Good evening to you, sir. Welcome. Gosh, this is going to be 25 minutes of me just doing this. Wow. Oh, lovely. I can try to find 20 different ways to do that. But let's work the appearance first. First and foremost, what do we have? Dave and Julie, you have a surprise guest? This is a red wine, of course, but what do you see when you swirl? As we jump to swirling this wine, and this final kind of outer layer rim forms where the top edge of the wine swirled, and it starts to drop down. Does it drop in sheets? Does it drop in tiers that form legs that stay firm? Are they thicker, thinner? Did they come down quickly, slowly? What do you see here? Recognizing, Dean, that you can't see my legs on camera, I'm assuming you're talking about this wine. So yes, they are beautiful legs, right? The tiers form slowly, but not, a trickle. So if they were going super slow, and you think about maybe honey as it would recede, or maple syrup as it would recede, And those two ideas are intentional in that they're filled with sugar. And sugar is what would form those legs or tiers in one of two forms, sort of that actual sugar form, residual sugar in the wine, or in the transformation of that sugar via yeast into alcohol. And the more sugar, the more fermentation of that sugar into alcohol, the higher alcohol, the thicker the tier, the leg, right? Well, Bernard, I think cheers to Chris for sure is in order, and to all of you for joining this evening. I'm happy to have you here. Dean, I get it. The wine, yes. I've never been, and nor will I ever be a leg model. So I just like to model these lovely legs. Gosh, that is really pretty nose. So we have a pretty substantial tier that forms, and it goes down with some viscosity. So there's an indication perhaps that we have some ripeness. And if that ripeness is an indication of warmth, perhaps in terms of a warm climate, but also perhaps a warm vintage in what is recognized otherwise as a cooler climate. We don't know enough yet. And as a result, that gives you something to think about. Dean, I apologize. My video still shows up. I hope that's not the case for everybody else. Maybe try popping out and popping back in and see if that comes back for you. Or if I'm out on other fronts, please let me know. I'm still showing my video running. So we've got a potentially ripe setting, vintage or site or just general location, region in the world. We have what kind of color? A reddish color. And it goes all the way to the rim, as was noted by Dean and Bobbin. So you've got maybe a less indication of any kind of age. This might be more on the youthful side. How do we know that? The variation from sort of the rim to the middle of the wine as you're looking down on it. If there's sort of a browning, tawny quality or a color variation from the rim to the center, that browning might indicate a characteristic of age. There's also a tiny bit of a watery meniscus or a watery rim on the very outside. And that's oftentimes an indication of a little bit higher alcohol. So we might be going from 13% alcohol to 13.5, 13.5 to 14 perhaps. You know, we're in that range perhaps. Mark, you're picking up a little bit of a browning rim. Okay. A faint one. Perhaps, yeah. Purple, youthful, deep look, yep. Maybe a tinge or hint at the edge. That edge might also be some of that watery meniscus kind of blurring the line of that red kind of purple character. It's sort of deep ruby on my side, maybe a little bit of purple in the core. I'm glad it worked. Thank you, Dean. Leo, appreciate your note there too. Okay, so we've got potentially not necessarily a very helpful color. And helpful, I mean by way of definitely showcasing a characteristic about the color that would lead us to one grape or another, one series of grapes or another, one place or another. A kind of reddish ruby, slightly purple tinged color is not going to say with any definitive characteristic what it is. It will help us to weed out what it might not be, right? And so that part of this process is the deductive process of evaluating wine is more about determining what it's not first before we determine what it is. And it doesn't appear, for example, to be Gamay or Pinot Noir, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, Petit Verdot or Tannat, for example. Maybe, but doesn't present that way. So it's in the middle. And in the middle is a lot of options, but we're sort of pushing out the outside realm. It's not the richest wine in the world. You can sort of see through it. I could probably read lettering through it. I can see my hand through the wine. It's not so light, though, on the other end of the spectrum that it's likely something like Pinot Noir, for example. It could be. It could be a richer version of that. But by way of sort of creating our parameters, let's say it's a medium weight, medium plus weighted wine based on the rim meniscus, based on the tiers that formed and the legs that stayed. All that from the appearance, right? So we've got a general profile of someplace potentially warm, a little bit of a moderate plus profile grape. So it gives us a place to begin. The aroma, yes. Now let's talk aroma because it is magnificent. Very perfume-like aroma, sweet and flowery. To quote Candy, I agree. The sweet fruit, there's like a sweet, lovely quality to the fruit, and yet there's also an old world element to this that is reminiscent a little bit, even though I just said I don't think this is Pinot Noir. It's kind of Burgundian. It's a little bit Rhone-like. There's a quality of sweet spice that's sort of oak oriented. So we're always looking for a few things, right? Fruit, earth, and wood. And those few things on the wood side present more as potentially cedar, sometimes dill, sometimes a bourbony element, sometimes more of a spice profile. And there's that sort of sweet spice. So there might be a little bit of oak here. It's heady. Like, I don't know, just it's drawing me in, and you want to take deep breaths. What kind of sweet fruit do you get? You know, that flour and some hay. Yeah, there's a barnyardy element here, but it's not the barnyard kind of manure, sweaty saddle leather. It's more about kind of that fresh hay, kind of newly cleansed barnyard kind of quality. There's a toasted nut seed kind of quality that's there, which I think also might be an indication perhaps of a little bit of wood. The spice is there. How about the fruit? Red fruit, black fruit, tree fruit. Yeah, Mark, thank you. There's also a little gaminess, right? There is a little bit of that, what I was referencing by way of kind of old world. There's a touch of gaminess that is reminiscent in a way of some of that meaty gaminess that you might get, say, from Syrah and the Rhone, which is why it sort of sits in my head, I guess, between Burgundy and the Rhone. The northern Rhone is in the Rhone, obviously, but it's closer to sort of the southern part of Burgundy and the bright cherry part. So in some ways, you're describing Syrah, and that would fit our profile of a medium weight red wine that could have a little bit higher alcohol, and certainly could see some oak. I think the cherry is sort of reddish cherry, but it's ripe and it's concentrated. It's like cherry juice more than it is cherry flesh, or like a super ripe kind of dripping cherry. You know, that just, it's not medicinal, and I don't find it to be necessarily candied or stewed. This is pretty. Well, let's find out how much of the profile from the nose and our visual observations manifest on the palate. Ooh, that's pretty smooth. It's pretty delightful. I'm having fun with this one. This is if you can, from your first taste, second taste, or if you've already been drinking this, umpteen tastes. Let's talk about the profile of the wine, and not necessarily yet the aromatics or the flavor profile yet. Let's talk about the structure of it. Is this wine on the lighter side, more robust side? Is it skim milk, 2% milk, or whole milk in terms of the viscosity and how it feels in your mouth? Where does it sit from that intensity side? Where is the acidity at? Is it high acidity? Are you still salivating? Moderate acidity? It got you a good punch of acidity to begin with. It lingered for 5 or 10 seconds and then sort of dissipated. Or is it low, where there's really no kind of major acidic impact? Where's the alcohol at? You get a little burn in the retro part of your retronasal, kind of in the back of your throat. Is there a heat you can kind of feel in it? Is there a weight that comes from that alcohol? Is there any sweetness? Mm. It's a dry wine, right? Definitely a dry wine. I agree with Dean and Bobbin that it's got a medium weight. It's not super tannic. There's a hint of tannin on the back end of it, right? Just a kind of fine dust of tannin that lays on your tongue. Doesn't necessarily go all over the mouth. Like, it's not super gripping or powerful, but it is some slight tannin. So there's some structure by way of that. There's some structure coming from the alcohol. There's a quality of some heat after that lingers sort of after the flavor dissipates. And I agree, there's maybe not as much flavor on the palate as there is on the nose by way of the aroma. Cherry taste for sure. I mean, I'm not going to show you because it's perhaps not pleasant, but even the wine I've spit has this like cherry cola or cherry juice look to it. I mean, the red is just so beautifully cherry, and that's indicative of what you find by way of aroma and taste then too. The meat, the cedar note, that wood, Sarah, thank you, it's perfect. And that sweet red fruit, that's a dead ringer for sure for consideration of Syrah. Sylvia's adding to the mix some Merlot, and I think that's a good call too. We might get more of a plummy note than cherry for Merlot. Kevin, you're picking up a metallic taste, huh? Interesting. But I agree, Candy, with the smoky kind of pucker front. South America for Sarah, coming in with that. Yeah, so like Malbec, South America, like I threw out Chilean Cabernet or Chilean Merlot, for example. There's Bonarda. There's many other varietals. Of course, you could have South American Syrah for one. Medium weight, lovely kind of quality that does linger in the way of a little bit of alcohol. So there's some warmth here. Huh. Well, let's do something. Let's do what we were doing on the aroma side of things. Let's talk a little bit about what it's not. So, can we rule out a few places that it's not, right? Can we focus on some areas that we're pretty comfortable saying this is not that, right? I'm pretty comfortable saying, for example, I don't think this is Bordeaux. I don't think this is a Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc type blend. I don't think this is Cabernet Franc, right? I don't think it gives us that element. I think we could talk about Italy, but I don't see this presenting sort of that northern Italian Corvina, or on the east side or on the west side. This doesn't present like Nebbiolo to me. Like the tannins, I think, would be more structured, a little less round and soft. We could be talking about a bigger Pinot Noir, per Dean's note. Yep, we could talk about Syrah, which you've already mentioned. We could be talking about a Syrah Grenache kind of element, or Southern Rhone. I tried recently a Gamay that had some more power to it. That was a little bit surprising. It was a Cru Beaujolais from one of the villages that had a little bit more structure. Yeah, Bernard, excuse me, I agree. It's not Cabernet Sauvignon. I don't think that's it, right? It doesn't have the structure. It doesn't have the profile, that cherry note. We get some of that currant, maybe. We get some more leathery notes. We get some, pencil box, that graphite element, maybe. Not getting any of that here, right? We're not getting the black fruit, so not Cabernet. So if it's not Cabernet, right, maybe we're talking about California, but I don't think so. California Syrah wouldn't necessarily give us that gaminess, wouldn't give us that other element. It could be, but it's not likely. So it's like, all right, I can sort of put out of my mind right now California and its reds, and not necessarily exclusively like that. The reds that are grown in California couldn't be talked about here. We're talking about Syrah. We're talking about Pinot Noir, maybe, right? I guess you could have the example here of a California Pinot Noir would be bigger, but there's something about this that doesn't indicate that. And that is that sort of gaminess, that meatiness. Grenache is an absolute thing to consider. Like if you're talking about Syrah, there's a great chance that there might be even some Grenache in the blend, right? If it's a blend. or even a small percentage of Grenache relative to a larger percentage of Syrah. There's an option that way. This could be Southern Italian, like we've talked about and tasted. Primitivo, for example, is a Zinfandel type blend that has some softness, has light tannin, has some richness. It was red, but probably a little bit darker. It wasn't quite this red. Let's think about, say, Australia, like South Africa, going around the world a little bit. Do we consider those places? And Spanish wines, great. Spanish, like a Navarro red, it's possible, but it isn't necessarily like jumping out as, wow, this tastes Spanish. And we've had that experience many times together where the wine we're tasting just has sort of a signature. And this doesn't necessarily read full-on signature Spanish or full signature Italian. Could it be German? We've talked about, say, Pinot Meunier. So that's an interesting call too. German Pinot Meunier giving us Pinot-like characteristics, that cherry with a little bit more richness. I had the occasion today to try a really lovely but more elegant version of Pinotage. And the Pinotage is a grape, of course, that's a cross of Pinot Noir and Cinsault. And that's a great example of potentially what we might be trying here, right? A Pinotage would give us Rhone-like character in the way of Cinsault, some of that meatiness. Pinot Noir, in terms of some of that cherry note, the body weight here is appropriate. So we could add Pinotage to the mix. The cherries coming out now, more candied cherry, like candied shell of, like what are those cherry candies called from my youth that I don't recall? Very cherry, truly cherry. Yeah, the more cherry concentrate profile. It's getting sweeter, almost, the cherry note on the nose. There's, we just bought some and just put on the list again. It's possible, right? We just bought some Blaufränkisch. So Blaufränkisch from Austria. And I remember being in Austria, in Eisenberg, with the Yaltis team, tasting some of their wines and remarking, like, there's a quality of Merlot and a quality of Syrah that's sort of a reference point for someone who hadn't tried a bunch of Blaufränkisch prior to that point. There's a quality of that, those two wines or those two grapes in Blaufränkisch, especially when it was in the riper side, more hillside oriented. So Midi Blaufränkisch kind of fits the bill of profile in terms of medium weight, some reddish fruit. Could be darker fruit though, so that might not be the right grape here. For those of us that were thinking about Pinot Noir, even in talking about Austria, talk about Saint Laurent, which is kind of close to Pinot Noir. It would be maybe a little bit, it's on the lighter side. This is on the light, medium, more medium side than I think Saint Laurent would be. There's also Zweigelt. So what do you think about Austria? What do you think about Pinotage? What do you think about Malbec or Syrah from South America? Syrah from, say, Crozes Hermitage in France? There's not like enough kind of, I should say there is a some. There's not as much, there's so much of that red cherry fruit that it would like almost is taking me away from the Rhone itself. Bernard, you're going European? Are you in the sort of French European camp? Are you in the Spanish camp? I don't think Portuguese here, for example. I don't, maybe Austria, maybe Germany. Austria, yeah. That's a cool thought. Playing the bottle game, it was a screw cap, and that doesn't tell us necessarily everything. But Austria certainly is known for using screw cap. So at minute 24, it's time to repour and to see if the wine changes dramatically. Oh, yes, it has. For those of you that haven't had another sip or another pour, give yourself one, and it's much earthier. More of that barnyard for me right now. Are you looking at the top of the screw cap? If you are, Dean, don't share any details, because if you're looking at the top and it's telling you things, then that might be telling me things. But even by saying it telling you things, and I'm thinking one thing in particular, the screw cap, the top of the screw cap from Austria in particular tells you everything. And maybe playing the game, playing the bottle game, not the wine game. It was wrapped in foil and it's a screw cap, so there's a good chance that it was wrapped in foil for a reason. I'm not unwrapping the foil, and nor should you. That ruins the fun of the game. But that does sway one's mind toward Austria, perhaps. Julie, you're going South Africa, South America. Cool. Celia, New World. Yep. So we've got a mix here, right? Eastern, not Western Europe. That's kind of a cool part about this wine. And part of the challenge of blind tasting these days, right? There are, with global warming and the warming of sites and just different and more widely understood winemaking techniques, you get the same kind of profiles, the same kind of results from different places. And the blending of the old world and the new world is difficult at this point, to make a distinction based on just that idea as we taste. So this could be going back to the beginning and what we smelled and what we saw, and what our initial conclusions were: riper site, riper vintage, ripe expression. It has viscosity, it has alcohol, but it doesn't have a bunch of stuffing, right? So it's not a particularly tannic grape, or it's not in a place where that tannin's super developed. And so there's kind of a dichotomy there of, this has ripe characteristics, really, really, really wonderful kind of juicy, ripe fruit, and a little bit of tannin and some higher alcohol. And so maybe that takes Germany out of the mix. Maybe that, I mean, traditionally you think of Austria in terms of it being a little bit on the lighter side, but some of those reds can get some alcohol and some richness, some structural richness, I should say, not richness in the way of the fruit profile. This is on the red side. If it was Pinotage, All right, so if it was Malbec, I think we'd get a little bit more blue elements. The floral notes are close. The Malbec would be nice as a call, but it's a little bit light for a Malbec. It'd be a very easy drinking Malbec. I think I would be expecting a little bit more structure from the tannin. Pinotage, maybe a little bit more of that kind of wild, earthy petroleum element, although today's example wasn't that. So I kind of like the idea of the Pinotage. An Eastern European, Austrian red, absolutely like that idea. Blaufränkisch from Austria in the running for me. Syrah still in the running, but maybe more like South Africa in the way of the Syrah, because that fruit is ripe. Like it's, I mean, you can get ripeness, of course, in the southern part of France, but Bernard, yeah, I'm curious, Chris, if you're still there, join us and tell us what you're thinking. And if you have it down to the actual vineyard, that would be great. Before we do our little reveal here in a minute. A younger wine, right? We saw a little bit of variation with some watery rim. Mark, you're going Barbera Aglianico, so you're going to Italy. That's cool. Yeah, the Barbera is not a bad thought. Barbera has some of that soft ripeness. Aglianico, I think we would get a little bit more richness, a little bit more dark stuff, but we had a Campagna Aglianico that we tasted a year or so back, I think, that was done in stainless, right? And that was just sort of a fresher expression, which isn't this, because I think there's a character of wood here. That so I think if we had wood and Aglianico, we'd have a little bit more richness and darkness. Barbera certainly is an opportunity. Okay, so I'm going to wrestle. I'm wrestling as we're getting to that half-hour mark between that Pinotage call, because it's top of mind from tasting today, and it kind of explains a little bit of that meatiness, a little bit of that Pinot Noir-like character cherry. I like that call. Or Austrian. Does the Austrian make sense? Like there's a little bit of that high alcohol that I don't think I would. It's not super high though. It's not like I'm retronasal breathing it. It's just 13.5 or so. There's a little bit of alcohol there. So yeah, it could be Austrian. Or Syrah. So South Africa's popping up for me twice. Chilean Syrah. That's a good idea, Julie. I mean, yeah, I think. Okay, so Julie is on Chilean Syrah, Pinotage, South Africa. So kind of an old world idea in a new world-ish spot, which you can certainly get from producers in both places, Chile and South Africa. That's cool. All right, one more taste, one more smell, and then plant your flags. Tell me what you think. Where are we going? I didn't get any closer. I didn't get any further in tasting. Gosh, I think I could make a very solid argument, for the Chilean Syrah, for the South African Pinotage, for the Austrian Blaufränkisch, and that's probably a greater indication of my lack of experience with those three grapes, and therefore, a disservice in a way to trying to parse out the detail. I've had most experience by way of personal travel to Austria, and so I might go there. This is a great call based on experience, right? So Bernard says, my German uncle buys a lot of red wine from Austrian monasteries. My wife, Kathy, says it's from Austria, but can't figure out the wine. I mean, so there's going back to our very first point, our first point of conversation, is there a quality about a wine sometimes that jogs a memory, that is a reference point that you particularly have because of experience? And can you validate that experience and that reference point with the process? And in your case, it sounds like you have. So I'm certainly one to go with the group or to follow a point. And I think partly bolstered too by the screw cap. I'll venture along. And I think so Saint Laurent, Zweigelt, and Blaufränkisch are three red grapes that you would encounter with some regularity. There are others, of course. There's Merlot and other and Syrah even in Austria, but those are the three kind of classics. Saint Laurent's on the lighter side. Zweigelt is a little bit more moderate in weight, and Blaufränkisch can be a little bit darker and more brooding. And so maybe we're tasting sort of that middle range, right? That Zweigelt from Austria, 2021, 2022. It's a newer wine, 2 to 4 years of age. Okay, yes, that's where I'm going to go. Whatever it is, I'm very happy to know about it because it's delicious. And I want to drink more of it. Hopefully you find it the same. Let's see. Ooh, I was off. This is Stift Kloster Neuburg, Saint Laurent. So we're drinking Saint Laurent, the lighter. I was trying to put those in general with 3 classifications, and that's really cool. And the neat thing, I think Bernard, maybe you picked it up, right? There was a little bit of a rip variation. This is 8 years old. This has some age on it. This is gorgeous. It's a relative of Pinot Noir, so ruby red color for sure. That's neat. Gosh, that's tasty. I love that that's got a little bit of the resolution of its tannin. Perhaps that's part of it coming from age. That is so cool. I like this. Hopefully you did too. it's neat to try Austrian wine. And for those of you then that I was referencing and didn't know this, but when you see that on a label, that's an indication of an Austrian wine under capsule. This is a fantastic little wine. For reference too, if you want to go down a wonderful rabbit hole, is visit austrianwine.com, I think it is. The Austrian government's website for wine is the best, bar none, of any other place in the world. They have all of the single vineyards, so-called reed vineyards or Erstelager vineyards, indicated on these magnificent maps. It's just the coolest interactive kind of programming of materials that you can find in the wine world. So this is a great resource for anyone who wants to study a little bit more about wine and Austrian wine in particular. If you want to taste a little bit more wine, as I mentioned earlier too, we're going to be tasting 16 wines on Saturday, and we have some spots available for our spring wine buying event. We also have in the next 3 weeks or 3 months, I should say, of the mystery wines available for pickup if you like to do that too. If that's not within the scope of your schedule and your parameters this weekend, no big deal. We'll be here and look forward to seeing you again soon, if not before our next mystery wine tasting, then at that one, I hope. Cheers to everybody. I'm going to drink a glass of this and wrap up the evening. Hope you're all well.